Story 1. The Hitchhiker Who Knew My Name. Thomas Reed had been driving 18-wheelers for 12 years, hauling refrigerated goods across the Midwest. He was a man who prided himself on routine, on knowing every truck stop between Chicago and Denver, every rest area with clean bathrooms, every diner that served hot coffee at 2 in the morning. He'd driven through blizzards that reduced visibility to nothing, through storms that made his rig shake like a tin can, and through fog so thick he could barely see his own hood. But nothing in those 12 years prepared him for what happened on Interstate 70, somewhere between Salina and Hays, Kansas, on an October night in 2019. It was 11:45 p.m. when Thomas merged onto the interstate after a brief stop for fuel. The night was unusually clear, the kind of night where stars stretched across the sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The moon was full, casting silver light across endless fields of harvested wheat. His CB radio crackled with occasional chatter from other drivers, and his GPS showed another 180 miles before his scheduled rest stop. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. The highway stretched ahead like a dark ribbon, empty except for the occasional pair of taillights in the distance. Thomas had the radio playing low, some classic rock station out of Wichita, and his thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, still warm from the truck stop. His cargo was a full load of frozen meat heading to Denver, and he was making good time. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily behind him, a sound he'd grown so accustomed to that he barely noticed it anymore. His dashboard lights glowed a soft green, and the white lines on the road disappeared beneath his truck in a hypnotic rhythm. This was his life, and he was content with it. The solitude never bothered him. In fact, he preferred it. Then he saw the figure on the shoulder. At first, it was just a shape in his headlights, maybe 200 yards ahead. Thomas eased off the accelerator slightly, squinting to make out what he was seeing. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A man standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the highway, his arm extended with his thumb out. A hitchhiker. Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. He had one unbreakable rule that had kept him safe for over a decade. Never pick up hitchhikers. Never! He'd heard too many stories, seen too many news reports about drivers who'd been robbed, attacked, or worse. The rule was simple, and it had served him well. But something about this hitchhiker made Thomas's foot move to the brake pedal almost involuntarily. The man was wearing a dark coat, jeans, and what looked like work boots. Nothing unusual about his appearance. He wasn't waving frantically or stepping into the road. He was just standing there, thumb out, with an almost supernatural stillness. As Thomas's truck approached, his headlights fully illuminated the man's face, and that's when Thomas felt ice water flood his veins. The hitchhiker was staring directly at him, not at the truck, but at him, as if he could see through the windshield, through the darkness of the cab, directly into Thomas's eyes. Thomas's truck rolled past the hitchhiker, and he told himself to keep driving, to forget what he'd seen, to stick to his rule. But his eyes flicked to his side mirror, and what he saw made him slam on the brakes. The hitchhiker was gone, completely gone. The shoulder where he'd been standing was empty, illuminated by Thomas's taillights and the full moon. There was nowhere for the man to have gone. No ditches deep enough to hide in, no trees, no structures. Just flat Kansas prairie stretching into darkness. Thomas sat there, his truck idling in the middle of the highway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He checked his passenger side, mirror. Nothing. He looked in his rear view. The highway behind him was empty. His hands were shaking as he reached for his CB radio, thinking maybe another driver had seen what he'd seen, but before he could press the talk button, he heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on his passenger door. Thomas's blood turned to ice. He slowly turned his head to the right, and there, standing on the passenger side step of his truck, visible through the window, was the hitchhiker. The man was smiling, a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes, and he knocked again, 3 more times, never breaking eye contact with Thomas. Thomas's rational mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe he'd pulled over without realizing it. Maybe the man had run to the truck. But he knew neither of those things were true. His truck was still in the middle of the highway, brake lights on, and there was no way anyone could have covered that distance so quickly. The hitchhiker raised his hand and pointed at the door lock, making a gesture that said, "Unlock it." Thomas shook his head slowly, his mouth dry, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The hitchhiker's smile faded, and he knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the cab like gunshots. Then the hitchhiker spoke, and Thomas heard it clearly despite the closed window, despite the rumble of his diesel engine. The man said Thomas's full name, not just his first name, but his middle name too, the name only his mother used when he was a child. Thomas Reed Morrison. The hitchhiker said it again slowly, savoring each syllable, and then added something that made Thomas's vision blur with terror. He said, "I've been waiting for you, Thomas. I've been waiting on this road for you specifically. We have an appointment tonight." Thomas didn't remember making the decision to move, but suddenly his foot was slamming down on the accelerator and his truck lurched forward with a roar. He didn't look in his mirrors. He didn't want to see if the hitchhiker was still there, clinging to his truck, or worse, still standing on that step. He pushed his rig to 70, then 80, then 85 miles per hour, faster than he'd ever driven a fully loaded truck on this highway. His CB radio erupted with static and distorted voices, none of them making any sense, all of them overlapping into a cacophony of noise that sounded almost like screaming. Thomas reached over and shut it off with trembling fingers. For 10 minutes he drove in absolute silence except for the roar of his engine and the whistle of wind around his cab. His eyes darted between the road ahead and his mirrors, terrified he'd see that figure again. Then his GPS started acting strange. The screen flickered and the route display changed. Instead of showing Interstate 70 continuing toward Hayes, it showed him on a road that didn't exist, a road that veered off into empty prairie. The estimated arrival time changed to a series of question marks, and then the screen went black. Thomas's phone, charging in the dashboard mount, also went dark despite being plugged in. That's when he noticed the air in his cab growing cold. Not just cool, but frigid, as if someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. His breath came out in visible clouds, and frost began forming on the inside of his windshield. The temperature gauge on his dashboard was functioning normally, showing the heater was running full blast, but the cold continued to deepen. Thomas could feel it seeping into his bones, a cold that felt wrong, unnatural, like it was coming from somewhere beyond the physical world. His teeth started chattering and his fingers began to go numb on the steering wheel. Then came the knocking again, but this time it wasn't coming from the passenger door. It was coming from directly behind him, from the sleeper berth of his cab. 3 slow, deliberate knocks followed by a voice, his voice, Thomas's own voice, saying, "Let me in, Thomas, let me out. We need to talk about where you're going." Thomas screamed, a raw sound of pure terror that tore from his throat. He knew, he absolutely knew with every fiber of his being that he was alone in that cab, that no one could possibly be in his sleeper berth, but he also knew that something was back there, something that wore his voice like a stolen coat. The knocking continued, rhythmic and patient, as if whatever was back there had all the time in the world. Thomas could hear movement now, the sound of fabric rustling, the creak of the bunk, as if someone was sitting up getting ready to pull aside the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the driver's seat. His mind raced through impossible options. Stop the truck and run? Drive faster? Call for help on a phone that was dead? Pray? Scream? He settled on the only thing he could do. He kept driving, pushing his truck even faster, his eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look in his rearview mirror, refusing to acknowledge what might be behind him. The temperature in the cab had dropped so low that ice was forming on every surface. His hands were cramping from the cold and from gripping the wheel. His face felt numb. And still the knocking continued, accompanied now by scratching sounds as if fingernails were dragging across the fabric of the curtain. Then the voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't his voice. It was his father's voice, his father who had died 8 years ago from a heart attack. The voice said, "Tommy, why didn't you visit me before I died? Why didn't you say goodbye? You were too busy driving this truck, weren't you? Too busy to see your old man one last time." Thomas felt tears freezing on his cheeks. His father had called him Tommy. No one else ever had. The guilt he'd carried for years, the regret of not being there at the end, came flooding back with crushing force. The voice continued, softer now, almost gentle. "Pull over, Tommy, just for a minute. Let's talk. I've missed you, son. I've missed you so much." Thomas's foot started to ease off the accelerator. Part of him, the part that still grieved, wanted to pull over, wanted to believe that somehow his father was really there. But another part of him, the part that recognized the wrongness of everything happening, screamed at him to keep going. A semi-truck blasted past him, going the opposite direction, its horn blaring, and the sudden noise snapped Thomas back to reality. He realized he'd been drifting into the oncoming lane. He jerked the wheel right, overcorrected, and felt his trailer start to sway. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was going to jackknife, going to roll this entire rig across the highway. He fought the wheel, eased off the gas, and managed to bring the truck back under control. The blast of adrenaline cleared his head. Whatever was in his truck, whatever was pretending to be his father, it was trying to kill him. Thomas spotted lights ahead, the blessed glow of civilization. A truck stop, its sign promising fuel, food, and most importantly, other people. He'd never been so grateful to see artificial light in his life. He guided his truck toward the exit, his entire body shaking, and as he took the off-ramp, the knocking stopped. The cold began to recede. By the time he pulled into the truck stop parking lot and threw his transmission into park, the temperature in his cab was back to normal. His GPS flickered back to life, showing him exactly where he was. His phone powered on, displaying a full battery. Everything was normal again, as if nothing had happened. Thomas sat there for 20 minutes before he could muster the courage to open his door. When he finally did, he practically fell out of the cab, his legs weak and unsteady. Other drivers were scattered around the parking lot, some fueling up, others walking toward the diner. Everything looked so normal, so mundane, so real. Thomas walked around his entire truck, checking every inch of it, looking for any sign of tampering or evidence of what he'd experienced. Nothing. His sleeper berth was exactly as he'd left it that morning, empty except for his neatly made bunk and his duffel bag. He went inside the truck stop, ordered coffee he couldn't taste, and sat in a booth where he could see his truck through the window. Other drivers came and went, talking about weather and traffic and loads, normal conversations about normal things. Thomas wanted to tell someone what had happened, but who would believe him? He pulled out his phone and searched for reports of hitchhikers on Interstate 70 in Kansas. What he found made his coffee cup slip from his numb fingers. There were dozens of reports going back decades. Drivers describing a hitchhiker who appeared and disappeared, who knew things he shouldn't know, who spoke in the voices of the dead. Several drivers had crashed after encountering him. 3 had died. 2 had simply vanished. Their trucks, found abandoned on the side of the road, engines still running, doors locked from the inside, drivers never seen again. Thomas called his dispatcher and quit over the phone. He didn't care about the load in his trailer, didn't care about the job he'd held for 12 years, didn't care about anything except never being on that highway again. He arranged for another driver to take over his truck and load, and he bought a bus ticket home. As he sat in the truck stop waiting for his ride, he kept thinking about what the hitchhiker had said. "We have an appointment tonight." Thomas had broken that appointment by refusing to stop, by refusing to let whatever that thing was into his truck. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the appointment had only been postponed, not canceled. 2 months later, Thomas was working at a warehouse, a job that kept him on solid ground surrounded by people in the daylight. He'd sold his commercial driver's license and vowed never to drive professionally again. But sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd look out his window at the empty street and wonder if that hitchhiker was still out there. Still waiting on some dark highway, still knowing his name, still patient, still ready to keep that appointment they'd made without Thomas's knowledge or consent. And every time a vehicle passed his house at night, every time headlights swept across his bedroom wall, Thomas would hold his breath and wait for the 3 slow, deliberate knocks that he prayed would never come. Story 2. The rest stop that doesn't exist. Angela Martinez had been a long-haul trucker for 6 years, specializing in overnight runs across the Southwest. She preferred driving at night when the desert highways were empty and the temperatures were bearable. She'd hauled everything from electronics to furniture, from Phoenix to Albuquerque, from Las Vegas to El Paso. Angela was practical, level-headed, and didn't believe in ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. She believed in diesel fuel, good maintenance, and keeping to a schedule. That pragmatic worldview shattered completely on a July night in 2022 on a stretch of highway in New Mexico that she'd driven 100 times before. Angela left Flagstaff at 8 p.m. with a full load of office furniture destined for Santa Fe. The route was straightforward. Take Interstate 40 east, then catch Highway 285 north. She'd done this run so many times she could practically drive it in her sleep. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures, and her truck was running smoothly. She had a full thermos of coffee, a playlist of podcasts downloaded to her phone, and a delivery window that gave her plenty of cushion time. Everything was exactly as it should be. Around midnight, somewhere between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, Angela started feeling the first signs of fatigue. It wasn't dangerous yet, just that heavy feeling behind her eyes that told her she'd need to stop soon. She knew there was a rest area coming up in about 15 miles, a place she'd stopped at dozens of times before. It was a small facility, nothing fancy, just bathrooms, vending machines, and a parking area for trucks. She'd grab a 20-minute power nap, use the restroom, and be back on the road refreshed. She saw the sign illuminated in her headlights. Rest area 2 miles. Angela put on her turn signal even though there wasn't another vehicle in sight. The highway was completely empty, just her headlights cutting through the darkness and the white lines disappearing beneath her wheels. She took the exit, a gentle curve that led away from the highway. And that's when she noticed something odd. The rest area looked different. She couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed, but something felt wrong. The parking lot was there, the same layout she remembered, but the lights were dimmer than usual. Actually, now that she looked more carefully, only about half the lights were working, and those that were functioning had a strange yellow tint that made everything look sickly and old. Angela pulled into a parking spot, set her brake, and sat there for a moment, trying to understand why this place felt so off. The building that housed the restrooms looked the same, a low concrete structure with that typical government-issue architecture, but it seemed shabbier somehow, more run down than she remembered. She grabbed her phone to check the time, 12:18 a.m. But when she looked at her phone screen, her service bars were gone, no signal. That was unusual but not unprecedented out here in remote areas. Angela unbuckled her seatbelt and opened her door, stepping down from the cab. The air hit her immediately, and it was wrong. Despite being July in New Mexico, the air was cold, genuinely cold, like a winter night. Her breath came out in visible clouds. She looked up at the sky and saw stars, thousands of them, more than she'd ever seen before, arranged in patterns that seemed almost familiar but not quite right. The parking lot was empty except for her truck. No other vehicles, no RVs, nothing. The silence was absolute and oppressive. Angela couldn't hear any traffic from the highway, which should have been audible from here. She couldn't hear crickets or any night sounds, just silence, deep and complete, pressing against her eardrums. She walked toward the restroom building, her footsteps echoing strangely, and noticed that the vending machines visible through the windows looked ancient, older models than should still be in service, with brands she didn't recognize. Angela pushed open the door to the women's restroom, and fluorescent lights flickered on with a buzzing sound that made her teeth ache. The bathroom was clean, almost too clean, as if it had been scrubbed recently but never actually used. The mirrors above the sinks were spotted with age, and when Angela looked at her reflection, she had to look away, quickly. Something about her reflection was wrong, just slightly off in a way she couldn't articulate. The proportions of her face seemed distorted, or maybe it was the lighting, or maybe she was just exhausted. She used the facilities quickly, washed her hands with soap that had no scent, and dried them under an air dryer that worked but made a sound like screaming wind. Angela hurried back outside, suddenly desperate to get back to her truck and leave this place. But when she exited the building, she stopped dead. There was another truck in the parking lot now, parked 3 spaces away from hers. A big rig, older model, covered in road dust. She hadn't heard it arrive. The engine wasn't running, no lights were on, and she couldn't see anyone in the cab. Angela approached her own truck, keys in hand, when she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around and saw a man walking toward her from the direction of the other truck. He was wearing clothes that looked outdated, jeans and a plaid shirt that seemed to be from decades ago, and a trucker cap. His face was shadowed, but she could see he was smiling. He raised a hand in greeting and called out to her, asking if she had any jumper cables. His voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away despite him being only 20 feet from her. Something in Angela's gut screamed at her to run. She didn't answer the man. She climbed into her truck, locked the doors, started the engine, and put it in gear. As she pulled away, she looked in her side mirror and saw the man still standing there, still smiling. But now there were others with him. 4 or 5 other figures, all standing perfectly still, all watching her truck drive away. Angela accelerated toward the exit, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, and as she approached the ramp back to the highway, she glanced in her rearview mirror one more time. The rest area was gone, completely gone. Where the parking lot and building had been, there was just empty desert, scrubland, and darkness. No lights, no structures, nothing. Angela's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. She merged back onto the highway and drove for 30 minutes straight without stopping, constantly checking her mirrors, terrified she'd see those figures standing on the side of the road. When she finally pulled into a well-lit truck stop with other drivers around, she sat in her cab for an hour before she could calm down enough to think clearly. The next day, Angela called the New Mexico Department of Transportation and asked about rest areas on Highway 285. The person she spoke to pulled up the records and told her there were 3 rest areas on that stretch of highway. Angela described the location where she'd stopped, and there was a long pause. Then the DOT employee asked her to hold while they checked something. When they came back on the line, their voice had changed, become more formal and cautious. They told Angela that there had been a rest area at that location, but it had been closed and demolished in 1978 after several incidents. Angela asked what kind of incidents. The employee hesitated, then said there had been reports of travelers going missing from that rest area, 5 people over a 3-year period. The rest area was shut down, the building was demolished, and the land was supposed to be cleared, but budget issues meant the project was never fully completed. However, according to their current records, there was nothing at that location now. Just empty land owned by the state. The employee asked Angela if she'd actually stopped there, and something in their tone suggested they knew others had reported the same thing. Angela hung up and started researching online. What she found made her blood run cold. There were forum posts going back years from truckers and other travelers describing the same experience. A rest area that appeared at night, that felt wrong, where the air was too cold and the silence was too complete. Most people who stopped there reported seeing other vehicles and other people, all of whom seemed off somehow, not quite real. Several people reported that when they tried to leave, they found themselves driving in circles, unable to find the exit until suddenly they were back on the highway with no memory of how they got there. But the worst stories were from people who had interacted with the other travelers at the rest area. One trucker reported having a conversation with a man who asked him detailed questions about his route, his cargo, and his family. The trucker thought nothing of it until he got home and discovered that his wife and children had been having nightmares every night he'd been gone. Nightmares about a stranger standing outside their windows watching them. Another woman reported meeting a female traveler in the restroom who seemed friendly until she smiled, and the woman realized her new companion had too many teeth, rows of them like a shark, visible for just a moment before appearing normal again. Angela never drove that route at night again. She changed her schedule, took different highways, added hours to her trips to avoid that stretch of road in darkness. But 6 months later, she was forced to take that route due to a closure on her preferred highway. It was 2 a.m. and she was exhausted, fighting to keep her eyes open. She saw the sign in her headlights. Rest area 2 miles. Angela's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen any exit, hadn't seen any indication a rest area was coming, but there was the sign, clear as day. She gripped her steering wheel and kept driving, refusing to take the exit. As she passed it, she glanced to her right and saw the off-ramp, and at the top of it, barely visible in the darkness, she saw the parking lot, the building, and dozens of trucks parked there. Many more trucks than should fit in that space. And standing at the edge of the ramp, illuminated by her headlights for just a moment, was a figure with an arm extended, thumb out, hitchhiking. But the figure was wrong, too tall, proportions distorted, and its face turned to follow her truck as she drove past. Angela saw its eyes reflect her headlights like an animal's eyes, glowing yellow and hungry. She drove for 3 hours straight without stopping, until she reached the outskirts of Santa Fe in full daylight. She delivered her cargo, collected her payment, and made a decision. Angela put in her 2-week notice with her trucking company. She'd been driving for 6 years and she'd seen things on lonely highways that most people would never believe. But that rest area, that impossible place that existed and didn't exist, that appeared and disappeared, was the final straw. Whatever it was, wherever it really was, Angela knew that it was waiting for travelers, collecting them somehow, and that if she'd stayed longer, if she'd interacted more with those figures in the parking lot, she might not have made it back to the highway. Angela now works as a dispatcher, helping other drivers plan their routes. Whenever someone calls asking about rest stops on Highway 285 in New Mexico, she tells them the official locations, the ones that are on the maps and in the records. But she also tells them casually that if they see a rest area that feels wrong, if they see a parking lot where the lights are too dim and the silence is too deep, they should keep driving. She never explains why. She just says, trust your instincts. Most drivers laugh it off. But a few, the ones who've been on the road long enough to know that highways have secrets, those drivers thank her and promise to be careful. Because they know what Angela knows. That America's highways connect more than just cities and states. Sometimes in the darkest hours of the night, they connect to places that shouldn't exist. Places that wait in the spaces between destinations, hungry and patient, and eternal. Story 3. The convoy that followed me. Derek Sullivan had been hauling freight for 9 years, mostly running routes through the Pacific Northwest. He specialized in lumber and construction materials, driving the mountain passes between Seattle and Boise, Portland and Spokane. Derek was a quiet man who kept to himself, listened to audiobooks during his long drives, and rarely used his CB radio except for traffic updates. He wasn't the type to make friends at truck stops or swap stories with other drivers. He did his job, got paid, and went home to his apartment where he lived alone with his dog. That solitary nature probably saved his life on a February night in 2023 when he encountered something on Highway 90 that still makes him wake up screaming. It was 9 p.m. when Derek left Spokane with a full load of lumber heading west toward Seattle. The weather forecast called for light snow in the mountain passes. Nothing unusual for February, nothing a driver with his experience couldn't handle. He'd driven through worse storms 100 times. His truck was in excellent condition, his tires were new, and he had chains if he needed them. Derek merged onto Interstate 90 and settled into his usual routine. An audiobook playing through his speakers, a thermos of hot chocolate in his cup holder, and his eyes scanning the road ahead. The snow started around 10:30, light flurries that swirled in his headlights like tiny ghosts. Traffic was sparse, just the occasional car or truck passing in the opposite direction. Derek was climbing into the Cascade Mountains, the road winding upward through dense forests of pine and fir trees. He'd driven this route so many times he knew every curve, every grade, every spot where ice tended to form. About 40 miles east of Snoqualmie Pass, Derek noticed headlights behind him in his mirrors. Another truck keeping pace about a quarter-mile back. Nothing unusual about that. Trucks often ended up traveling together on long stretches of highway, matching speeds, keeping each other company from a distance. But after 20 minutes, Derek noticed the truck behind him was getting closer. Not aggressively, just gradually narrowing the gap. Derek checked his speedometer. He was doing 60, appropriate for the conditions and the grade. The truck behind him should have passed if it wanted to go faster, but instead it just kept closing the distance. Derek tapped his brakes lightly, just enough to flash his brake lights, a signal that said, "Back off a little, give me some space." The truck behind him didn't slow down. It kept coming closer. Derek felt a flicker of irritation. Tailgating on a mountain highway in the snow was dangerous and unprofessional. He reached for his CB radio, intending to hail the driver and ask them to back off. But before he could key the mic, he saw more headlights appear behind the first truck. Another big rig, same distance back, matching speed. Then another, and another. Within 5 minutes, there were 6 trucks behind him, all following in a perfect line, all maintaining the exact same distance from each other. Derek's irritation shifted to confusion. Convoys weren't uncommon, but this was strange. The trucks were all the same model, all the same dark color, and none of them had any company markings visible. Derek tried his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is the lumber hauler westbound on 90. You got a convoy behind me? Anyone want to pass?" Static answered him, harsh and loud, with strange crackling sounds underneath that almost sounded like whispers. He tried again. "This is westbound lumber, requesting the convoy behind me. Identify yourselves." More static, but this time Derek heard something else. Laughter. Low, multiple voices laughing in unison, barely audible beneath the white noise. Derek felt his scalp prickle. He turned off the CB radio. The convoy was still behind him, still maintaining that perfect formation. Derek decided to let them pass. He put on his right turn signal and started to ease toward the shoulder, slowing down to let the trucks go by. But as he slowed, so did the convoy. When he dropped to 50 miles per hour, they dropped to 50. When he slowed to 40, they matched him exactly. Derek pulled back into his lane and accelerated. The convoy accelerated with him, keeping that same distance, that same perfect formation. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal trucking behavior. He decided to take the next exit, a small turnoff that led to a rest area about 5 miles ahead. He'd pull off, let this weird convoy pass, maybe grab a coffee and calm his nerves. The exit appeared in his headlights, and Derek took it, watching his mirrors to see the convoy continue on the highway. But they didn't. All 6 trucks took the exit behind him, still in perfect formation, still maintaining that exact spacing. Derek's heart rate kicked up. The rest area was small, just a parking lot and a closed information booth, and when Derek pulled in, he saw it was completely empty. No other vehicles, no people, just his truck and the 6 behind him. Derek pulled into a parking spot and watched his mirrors. The 6 trucks pulled in behind him and arranged themselves in a semicircle, boxing him in. Their engines stayed running, headlights on, but Derek couldn't see anyone in any of the cabs. The windows were dark, impenetrable, as if the glass was tinted beyond legal limits or covered from the inside. Derek grabbed his phone. No signal. He tried calling 911 anyway. The call wouldn't connect. He tried texting his dispatcher. Message failed to send. Derek was completely cut off, alone in a rest area with 6 trucks full of people he couldn't see, people who had followed him off the highway for no reason he could understand. Derek sat there for 10 minutes, waiting to see what would happen. Nothing. The trucks just sat there, engines idling in perfect unison, creating a low rumbling that Derek could feel in his chest. Then, simultaneously, all 6 trucks flashed their high beams 3 times. Derek's blood went cold. That was a signal, a deliberate communication, but he had no idea what it meant. The trucks flashed their lights again 3 times in perfect synchronization. Derek made a decision. He started his engine, put his truck in gear, and drove directly at the gap between 2 of the trucks blocking his exit. He expected them to move, to adjust, to block him, but as he approached, the 2 trucks rolled backward slightly, just enough to let him through. Derek gunned his engine and shot through the gap, his heart hammering, his hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. He accelerated out of the rest area and back onto the highway, checking his mirrors constantly. The 6 trucks didn't follow immediately. They stayed in the rest area for maybe 30 seconds. Then, one by one, they pulled out and reformed their convoy on the highway behind him. Derek pushed his truck as fast as he dared on the snowy road, hitting 70 miles per hour, then 75. The convoy matched his speed effortlessly. He tried taking random exits, doubling back, taking side roads. Every time the convoy followed. They never lost him, never fell behind, never broke formation. Hours passed. Derek had no idea where he was anymore. He'd taken so many turns, driven through so many small towns and back roads trying to lose them, that he was completely disoriented. His GPS had stopped working an hour ago, the screen frozen on a map that showed him in the middle of a lake. At 3 a.m., Derek's fuel gauge was approaching empty. He'd been driving for 6 hours, most of it at high speeds, burning through diesel at an unsustainable rate. He had maybe 30 miles of range left, probably less. The convoy behind him showed no signs of stopping, no signs of running low on fuel. Derek spotted lights ahead, a small town, maybe a gas station. He took a chance and pulled into what looked like a 24-hour truck stop, an old independent place with a few pumps and a diner. The convoy followed him into the parking lot. Derek pulled up to a pump and sat there, trying to decide what to do. Fuel up and keep running? Go inside and call for help? Confront whoever was in those trucks? Before he could decide, the door to the diner opened and an old man walked out, a coffee cup in his hand. He looked at Derek's truck, then at the convoy, then walked slowly over to Derek's window. Derek rolled it down a crack. The old man leaned close and spoke in a voice like gravel. "You're in trouble, son. Those things behind you, they're not truckers, they're not even human. Been seeing them on this highway for 40 years. They pick someone and they follow until you either crash from exhaustion or you pull over and let them take you. Only one way to lose them. Derek's voice cracked when he spoke. How? The old man took a sip of his coffee and looked back at the convoy. You have to drive until sunrise. They can't follow in daylight. But you can't stop, can't slow down, and you absolutely cannot let them surround you completely. You do that, you're gone. I've seen it happen. Trucks found empty, engines still running, drivers vanished. You've got about 3 hours until dawn. Can you make it? Derek looked at his fuel gauge. Probably not, he admitted. The old man nodded slowly. Then you better fuel up fast, and I mean fast. Don't turn off your engine, don't get out of your cab, I'll pump for you. You pay me later if you survive. Derek handed the old man his credit card through the crack in the window, and the old man fueled up Derek's truck while standing between Derek and the convoy, as if his presence provided some kind of protection. The whole time, the 6 trucks sat there, idling, waiting. When the tank was full, the old man handed back the card and said one more thing. Don't look in your mirrors too much. Sometimes, if you look too long, you see what's really in those cabs. Trust me, you don't want that. Then he walked back into the diner without looking back. Derek pulled out of the truck stop and back onto the highway. The convoy followed. He drove through the darkness, through small towns and long stretches of empty road, constantly checking the time. 3:15 a.m., 3:30, 4 o'clock. The sky remained stubbornly black. Derek's eyes burned from fatigue and fear. His muscles ached from tension. He'd never been so tired in his life. But adrenaline kept him alert. At 4:30, he made the mistake of looking too long in his rearview mirror, really looking at the cab of the lead truck behind him. He saw something in the driver's seat. Not a person, something tall and thin with too many joints in its arms, with a head that was the wrong shape. It turned to look at him, and Derek saw eyes that reflected light like a cat's. But there were too many of them, arranged in patterns that made his brain hurt to process. Derek jerked his eyes back to the road, his whole body shaking. The old man had been right. He shouldn't have looked. At 4:45, Derek saw the first hint of gray on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming. At 5:15, as the sun finally broke over the mountains, Derek looked in his mirrors and saw the convoy fall back. The trucks slowed, and one by one they took an exit Derek hadn't noticed, disappearing from the highway as if they'd never existed. Derek drove for another hour in full daylight before he finally pulled over at a busy truck stop full of normal drivers and normal trucks. He stumbled into the diner, ordered coffee, and sat there shaking for 20 minutes before he could lift the cup to his lips. Derek never took a night run through the Cascades again. He switched to daytime routes only, turning down jobs that would have him in those mountains after dark. He told his story once to another driver at a truck stop, and the man just nodded slowly and said he'd heard similar stories from other drivers. There's something out there, the man had said, something that uses the highways at night, hunting for reasons we can't understand. Derek didn't ask what it was or where it came from. He didn't want to know. He just wanted to forget the sound of those 6 engines idling in perfect unison, the synchronized flash of those high beams, and the thing he'd seen in his mirror with too many eyes and too many joints. Driving a truck on a highway where the rules of reality didn't quite apply. Story 4. The Phantom Truck Stop. Robert Chen had been driving cross-country routes for 15 years, specializing in electronics and high-value cargo that required careful handling and tight security. He was methodical, professional, and prideful about his perfect safety record. Not a single accident, not a single late delivery, not a single complaint from any shipper in 15 years. Robert treated trucking like a science, planning every route down to the minute, calculating fuel stops, rest breaks, and traffic patterns with precision that bordered on obsessive. That rigid adherence to planning is probably why what happened to him in Oklahoma was so terrifying. Because what he encountered couldn't be planned for, couldn't be calculated, and shouldn't have existed at all. It was March of 2021, and Robert was hauling a load of computer servers from California to a data center in Virginia. He'd mapped out every stop, every meal break, every fuel station. He left Amarillo at 6 p.m., planning to drive through the night and reach Oklahoma City by morning. The route was simple: Interstate 40 straight east, a road he'd driven dozens of times. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and Robert's truck was running perfectly. Everything was exactly according to plan, exactly how Robert liked it. Around midnight, Robert was somewhere in the Oklahoma Panhandle, a stretch of highway so flat and empty it felt like driving across the surface of an alien planet. His GPS showed him passing through tiny towns with populations in the double digits, places that were just names on a map and a handful of lights in the vast darkness. Robert had been driving for 6 hours and was starting to think about his scheduled rest stop in about 45 minutes at a truck stop he'd used before, a reliable place with good coffee and clean facilities. But then Robert saw something that made him frown. A sign illuminated in his headlights. Truck stop, next exit, open 24 hours. Robert glanced at his GPS. There was no truck stop marked at this location. His meticulously researched route didn't include any services for another 30 miles. Robert prided himself on knowing his routes, and he'd never seen this truck stop before. He considered taking the exit. Maybe his GPS data was outdated, but he decided against it. He had a plan, and he'd stick to it. He drove past the exit. 10 minutes later, he saw another sign. Truck stop, next exit, open 24 hours. The same sign, the exact same wording. Robert checked his GPS again. Still no truck stop marked. He noted his mile marker and kept driving. This was strange, but not impossible. Maybe it was a new truck stop that hadn't been added to the GPS database yet. 10 more minutes passed, and Robert saw the sign again. Same exit, same truck stop, according to the sign. But that was impossible. Robert had been driving at a steady 65 miles per hour for 20 minutes. He should have covered over 20 miles. He couldn't be seeing the same exit. Robert felt a cold sensation in his stomach. He checked his odometer. The numbers were advancing normally. He checked his speedometer. 65 miles per hour, steady. But the exit signs kept appearing, always saying the same thing, always promising the same truck stop. Robert saw it 5 more times over the next hour, and each time his confusion turned more and more into fear. He was driving in a straight line on a major interstate highway. His instruments all showed he was making progress, but the same exit kept appearing like the highway was looping. Finally, Robert made a decision. The next time he saw the sign, he'd take the exit. He needed to understand what was happening, needed to see this truck stop, needed to confirm he wasn't losing his mind. The sign appeared right on schedule, and Robert took the exit, his hands tight on the wheel. The off-ramp curved away from the highway and led to a truck stop that looked almost normal. Almost. There was a main building with lights on, several fuel pumps under a covered area, and a parking lot with spaces for trucks. But something about it was off in ways Robert couldn't immediately identify. He pulled into the parking lot and saw 3 other trucks already parked, all older models, all covered in road dust, all sitting with their engines off and their cabs dark. Robert parked at a distance from them, set his brake, and sat there studying the place. The truck stop looked operational. Lights were on inside the main building, and he could see what looked like a convenience store and a small diner area. But there was no movement inside. No people walking around, no cashier visible, no customers. The place was lit up and open but appeared completely abandoned. Robert checked his phone. No signal. That was becoming a common theme in his experiences, he thought bitterly, remembering stories other drivers had told. He grabbed his wallet and a flashlight, then climbed out of his cab. The air was warm, normal for Oklahoma in March, and he could hear the wind moving across the flat landscape. But he couldn't hear any traffic from the highway, even though it should have been audible from here. The silence was broken only by the wind and the creaking of metal signs swaying on their posts. He walked toward the main building, his boots crunching on gravel. As he got closer, he could see through the windows more clearly. The convenience store was stocked with products, aisles full of chips and candy and drinks. The diner had tables and chairs, a counter with stools, and a kitchen area visible through a serving window. Everything looked ready for business, but there was absolutely no one there. Robert tried the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and a bell chimed, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Robert stepped inside and immediately noticed that something was very wrong with this place. The products on the shelves were wrong. Not spoiled or damaged, but wrong in a way that made his brain itch. Candy bars and wrappers with brand names he'd never heard of. Chips in bags with logos that looked almost familiar but not quite right, like someone had tried to recreate popular brands from memory and gotten the details wrong. Drinks in bottles with labels in English, but the English was off. Words spelled strangely, phrases that didn't quite make sense. He walked to the diner area and saw menus on the tables. The food items listed were normal, burgers and fries and sandwiches, but the prices were from decades ago. A hamburger for 95 cents. Coffee for a quarter. Robert picked up one of the menus and noticed the paper felt wrong. Too smooth, too uniform, like it had been printed on material that wasn't quite paper. He set it down carefully and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" His voice echoed strangely, as if the building was much larger than it appeared. No answer came. Robert walked behind the counter, something he'd never normally do, but he needed to understand this place. The kitchen area was spotless, equipped with grills and fryers and all the usual restaurant equipment, but none of it looked like it had ever been used. No grease stains, no wear marks, no signs of actual cooking. The cash register on the counter was an old mechanical model, the kind that required you to punch keys to enter prices. Robert tried pressing a key. Nothing happened. The register was a prop, non-functional, just for show. Robert left the building and walked toward the other parked trucks. As he got closer, he could see them more clearly in the truck stop's lights, and what he saw made him stop walking. The trucks were old, models from the 1970s and 80s, but they looked brand new. No rust, no dents, paint jobs that gleamed as if they'd just rolled off the factory floor. But the company logos on the doors were for companies Robert had never heard of. And when he looked in the windows, he saw the cabs were empty. Completely empty. No seats, no steering wheels, no dashboards. Just empty metal shells that looked like trucks from the outside but were hollow inside. Robert backed away from the trucks, his heart racing. This place wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was some kind of elaborate fake, a movie set maybe, or an elaborate prank, but who would build something like this in the middle of nowhere, and why? Robert turned to go back to his own truck to get out of here and back on the highway when he heard something that froze him in place, the sound of a diesel engine starting. He spun around and saw one of the empty trucks, one of the hollow shells with its lights coming on. The truck's engine was running, a deep rumble that Robert could feel in his chest, but there was no one in the cab. The truck was empty just as it had been moments before, but it was running. Then the second truck started, then the third. All three empty trucks were now idling, their lights on, engines running with no drivers. Robert ran. He sprinted across the parking lot to his own truck, fumbled with his keys, got the door open and climbed inside. He started his engine with shaking hands and threw the transmission into gear. As he pulled away, he looked in his mirrors and saw the 3 empty trucks begin to move. They rolled forward in perfect unison, following him even though there was no one driving them. Robert accelerated toward the exit that led back to the highway, and the empty trucks accelerated behind him. He reached the ramp and merged back onto the interstate, his speedometer climbing past 70, past 80. The empty trucks followed him onto the highway, staying right behind him, matching his speed exactly. Robert drove faster than he ever had with a loaded trailer, pushing 85 miles per hour, his truck shaking from the speed and the weight. The empty trucks stayed with him, never falling back, never pulling alongside, just following in a perfect line. Robert's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Trucks couldn't drive themselves, not in 2021, not these old models, and certainly not empty shells with no interiors. But they were behind him, undeniably real, impossibly present. Then Robert saw something ahead that gave him hope. Lights. Lots of lights. A real town, a real truck stop, one he recognized from his route planning. A place that was definitely on the maps, definitely real. He aimed for it like a drowning man swimming toward shore. As he got closer, as the lights got brighter and he could see other vehicles and buildings and signs of normal civilization, he checked his mirrors one more time. The empty trucks were gone. Simply gone. The highway behind him was empty. No headlights, no vehicles, nothing. Robert pulled into the real truck stop and parked among dozens of other trucks. He climbed out on shaking legs and walked into the brightly lit convenience store where a tired-looking cashier was restocking shelves. The sight of another human being, a real person doing a normal job, almost made Robert cry with relief. He bought a coffee he didn't want just to have an interaction with someone real to confirm he was back in the normal world. The cashier asked him if he was okay, said he looked pale. Robert just nodded and said he was tired. He sat in his truck for 2 hours before he felt calm enough to drive again. When he finally continued his journey, he watched his GPS obsessively, comparing it to mile markers and town names, making absolutely sure he was on the real Interstate 40 and not some impossible loop. He made it to Oklahoma City without further incident, delivered his load on time, and maintained his perfect record. But Robert never drove through that section of Oklahoma at night again. He adjusted his routes, his carefully calculated plans, to make sure he passed through during daylight hours. Robert started asking other drivers about strange truck stops, places that didn't seem quite right. He found more stories than he expected. Truck stops that appeared and disappeared, that showed up in places where they shouldn't exist, that were always open but never had staff, that trapped drivers in loops or lured them into situations they barely escaped from. One driver told him about a truck stop where the coffee was free but everyone who drank it disappeared. Another described a place where the fuel pumps worked but the fuel evaporated from your tank within miles. The stories all had the same quality, that sense of wrongness, of reality not quite functioning correctly. Robert realized that America's highway system, especially in the remote stretches, the empty places between cities, might not be entirely fixed in normal reality. There might be gaps, thin places where something else leaked through, something that mimicked human civilization but got the details wrong. Truck stops that were echoes or copies or traps built by something that didn't quite understand what a truck stop should be. And drivers like him, traveling alone through the night through those empty places, might stumble into these gaps and have to find their way back out. Robert still drives trucks. He still maintains his perfect safety record. He still plans his routes with meticulous care. But now his planning includes avoiding certain areas, certain stretches of highway where other drivers have reported anomalies. He keeps a notebook of strange locations, sharing information with other drivers who've had similar experiences, building an informal map of places to avoid. Because Robert knows now that the highway system isn't just asphalt and painted lines, It's a network that connects not just places but possibilities, and sometimes those possibilities include things that shouldn't exist, waiting in the darkness for drivers who take the wrong exit. Story 5. The Voice on the CB Radio. Patricia Daniels had been a trucker for 12 years, running routes primarily through the Midwest from Illinois to Nebraska, from Iowa to Kansas. She was known among other drivers as someone reliable, friendly, and always willing to help a fellow trucker in need. Patricia loved the CB radio culture. The camaraderie of drivers checking in with each other, sharing traffic information, warning about speed traps, and sometimes just chatting to pass the time on long, lonely stretches. Her CB handle was Red Hawk, a reference to her auburn hair and her sharp eyes that never missed a detail on the road. She thought she'd heard every kind of conversation possible on the CB until a September night in 2022, when she heard a voice that changed everything. Patricia left Des Moines at 7 p.m. with a load of agricultural equipment heading to Omaha. It was a short run, just over 2 hours in good conditions, an easy overnight delivery that would have her back home by midnight. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures, and traffic was light. Patricia had her CB radio on as always, tuned to Channel 19, the standard channel for truckers. The usual chatter filled her cab, drivers talking about construction zones and rest stop recommendations, the comfortable background noise of her profession. About 45 minutes into her drive, somewhere on Interstate 80 west of Des Moines, the CB chatter suddenly stopped. Complete silence, which was unusual for Channel 19 on a weeknight. Patricia checked her radio. It was on, volume was up, squelch was properly adjusted. The radio was working fine, but no one was talking. Then, after about 30 seconds of silence, a voice came through. A woman's voice, clear and strong, but with something off about it that Patricia couldn't immediately identify. The voice said, "Red Hawk, this is Knight Rider, do you copy?" Patricia was surprised someone was using her handle. She keyed her mic. "This is Red Hawk. I copy you, Knight Rider. What's your 20? Your location," she meant, asking where the other driver was. The voice responded immediately. "I'm right behind you, Red Hawk. I've been following you for miles. Look in your mirror." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. She checked her mirrors. There was a truck behind her, maybe a quarter-mile back, headlights visible but no other details, clear in the darkness. Patricia keyed her mic again, trying to keep her voice casual. "Roger that, Knight Rider. I see you back there. You heading to Omaha, too?" There was a pause, longer than normal for a CB conversation, and when the voice came back, it sounded different. Closer somehow, more intimate, as if the person was speaking directly into Patricia's ear rather than through a radio. "No, Red Hawk, I'm not heading to Omaha. I'm heading wherever you're heading. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Patricia's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was wrong. This felt like a threat, like someone was playing a dangerous game. She keyed her mic, her voice harder now. "Listen, Knight Rider, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this isn't funny. Identify yourself properly or get off this channel." The voice laughed, a sound that made Patricia's skin crawl. It wasn't a normal laugh. It had layers to it, multiple tones overlapping, as if several people were laughing at once but trying to sound like one person. "Oh, Red Hawk," the voice said. "I've identified myself perfectly. I'm Knight Rider. I'm the one who rides at night. I'm the one who follows drivers like you, drivers who are always so helpful, always so friendly. I've been listening to you for years, Red Hawk. I know your voice so well. I know your routes, your schedules, your habits. I know where you live." Patricia felt ice water flood her veins. She grabbed her phone with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel, intending to call the police. But her phone screen was black, dead. She'd charged it fully before leaving, and it had been at 98% when she'd last checked it 20 minutes ago. She tried turning it on. Nothing. Patricia looked in her mirrors again. The truck behind her was closer now, maybe an eighth of a mile back, and it was maintaining that exact distance, matching her speed perfectly. She tried the CB again, switching to Channel 9, the emergency channel. "Help. This is Red Hawk on Interstate 80 westbound. I need assistance. Someone is following me and threatening me." No response came on Channel 9. Patricia switched back to Channel 19 and immediately heard the voice again. "You can't call for help, Red Hawk. No one else can hear you right now. It's just you and me on this channel. Just the two of us having a nice conversation. Isn't this what you wanted? You love talking on the CB. You're always so chatty, so friendly. Well, now you have my full attention." Patricia's breath was coming fast and shallow. She pressed the accelerator, pushing her speed up to 75, then 80. The truck behind her matched her speed exactly, staying at that same distance. Patricia tried one more time to reach other drivers. "Breaker, breaker, this is Red Hawk. Is anyone out there? Anyone listening? Please respond." Silence answered her, broken only by static, and then the voice again. "I told you, Red Hawk, it's just us, but don't worry, I'm very good company. Let me tell you about yourself. You live in a blue house on Maple Street in Des Moines. You have a daughter named Sarah who's studying veterinary medicine in Colorado. You have a dog named Buster, a golden retriever who's getting old now, isn't he? You should spend more time with him. You never know how much time you have left." Patricia felt tears of fear and rage burning in her eyes. How did this person know these things? Her address wasn't listed publicly. Her daughter's name, her dog's name. These were personal details that shouldn't be available to some psychopath with a CB radio. Unless this person had been stalking her, researching her, watching her. The voice continued, relentless and calm. "You stop at the same truck stop every Tuesday and Thursday, the one outside Iowa City. You always order the meatloaf. You always sit in the booth by the window. You're very predictable, Red Hawk. That makes my job so much easier." Patricia made a split-second decision. There was an exit coming up, a small town with a population of maybe 3,000 people. She'd pull off, find the police station, get help. She took the exit without signaling, hoping to surprise whoever was following her. But as she curved down the off-ramp, she checked her mirror and saw the truck following. Taking the exit behind her, still maintaining that exact distance. The voice on the CB laughed again. "Did you really think that would work? I know where you're going before you know it yourself. I can read you, Red Hawk. I can see inside your mind." Patricia drove into the small town, looking desperately for the police station, for any sign of help. The streets were empty, no other cars, no pedestrians, not even any lights on in the houses. The whole town looked abandoned, as if everyone had left or was hiding. Patricia saw a sign for the police station and turned toward it, her heart pounding. The building was there, a small brick structure with a flagpole out front, but it was dark. Completely dark. No lights, no cars in the parking lot, no sign of anyone inside. Patricia pulled into the parking lot anyway and laid on her horn, a long, continuous blast that echoed through the empty streets. No one came. The town remained silent and dark. Patricia looked in her mirror and saw the truck pull into the parking lot behind her, positioning itself to block the exit. The voice came through the CB, and now it sounded amused. "No one's going to help you, Red Hawk. This town is closed tonight. Closed for our special conversation. Now I want you to do something for me. I want you to get out of your truck and come talk to me face to face. I've been following you for so long, and I think it's time we finally met properly. Don't you agree?" Patricia sat frozen in her cab, her mind racing through options. She couldn't outrun this truck, couldn't call for help, couldn't find anyone to assist her. She was trapped in an empty town with someone or something that knew everything about her and had somehow isolated her from the rest of the world. Then she remembered something her father had told her years ago when she'd first started trucking. If you're ever in real trouble, if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut and do whatever it takes to survive. Don't be polite. Don't be reasonable. Just survive. Patricia put her truck in gear and drove straight at the truck blocking her exit. She wasn't going to ram it, but she was going to call this person's bluff. If they wanted to hurt her, they'd have to do it in a way that left evidence, in a way that would be investigated. She accelerated directly toward the other truck, her horn blaring. At the last second, the blocking truck moved, rolling backward just enough to let her pass. Patricia shot through the gap and back onto the street, heading for the highway. The voice on the CB was shouting now, the calm facade broken. "You can't leave. We're not finished. Get back here." Patricia drove faster than she ever had, running stop signs, blowing through the empty intersections, desperate to reach the highway. Behind her, she could see the truck following, its high beams blazing, gaining on her. She reached the on-ramp and merged back onto Interstate 80, pushing her speed to 85 miles per hour. The CB radio crackled and hissed, the voice distorted now, barely intelligible through waves of static. "You'll see me again, Red Hawk. This isn't over. I know where you live. I know where your daughter goes to school. I'll find you when you least expect it." Then, as suddenly as it had started, the voice cut off. The normal CB chatter returned, drivers talking about weather and traffic, the comfortable, familiar noise. Patricia checked her mirrors and saw the truck behind her was gone. The highway was empty except for normal traffic in the distance. Her phone suddenly powered on, showing 98% battery, as if it had never died. Patricia pulled into the next truck stop she saw, a busy place full of other drivers, and stumbled into the restaurant on shaking legs. She sat in a booth for an hour, drinking coffee she couldn't taste, watching other truckers come and go, listening to normal conversations, trying to convince herself she was back in the real world. Eventually, she called her daughter in Colorado. Sarah answered, confused about why her mother was calling so late, but happy to talk. Patricia didn't tell her what had happened. She just wanted to hear her daughter's voice, to confirm she was safe and real. After the call, Patricia walked back to her truck and sat in the cab, staring at her CB radio. She thought about turning it off, about never using it again. But the CB was essential for her job, for safety, for communication with other drivers. Instead, she reached down and changed her handle. Red Hawk was retired. From now on, she'd use a new handle, something generic and unmemorable. And she'd be more careful about what information she shared over the air, more aware that someone might be listening with bad intentions. Patricia delivered her load to Omaha that night, 2 hours late, with an excuse about mechanical trouble that her dispatcher accepted without question. But Patricia never forgot the voice, and sometimes late at night when she was driving alone, she'd hear something in the static of her CB that sounded almost like laughter. Like someone was out there listening, waiting for another chance to continue their conversation. Patricia learned what other long-time truckers knew but rarely spoke about. The CB radio was more than just a communication tool. It was a window. And sometimes things looked through that window from the other side. Things that knew how to use voices and words. Things that hunted in the spaces between radio frequencies. And once they'd heard you, once they'd learned your voice and your handle, they never really let you go. They just waited in the static, patient and hungry for the next time you keyed your mic and invited them back into your world. Story 6. The truck that wouldn't stay buried. Vincent Harper had been hauling cars and trucks on a transport trailer for 23 years, working primarily for auction houses and dealerships across the southern states. He'd transported every kind of vehicle imaginable, from brand new luxury cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to rusted-out junkers heading to salvage yards. Vincent had seen it all, or so he thought, until he picked up a load in Louisiana that made him question everything he knew about the world. It was May of 2023 when Vincent got a call from a small auction house outside Baton Rouge about a special transport job that paid triple his normal rate. The job was simple. Pick up one vehicle, a 1967 Chevrolet pickup truck, and deliver it to a private collector in Tennessee. The catch was that the pickup had to be transported at night, and Vincent had to drive straight through without stopping except for fuel. The auction house owner wouldn't explain why, just said the collector was very specific about the conditions and was willing to pay premium money for absolute discretion and adherence to the schedule. Vincent agreed. Triple rate was triple rate, and he'd driven plenty of night runs before. He arrived at the auction house at 8 p.m., and what he saw made him understand why this job paid so well. The 1967 Chevrolet pickup was in terrible condition, rusted and dented with shattered windows and a front end that looked like it had been in a serious collision. But what really caught Vincent's attention was how it was being stored. The truck was inside a shipping container that had been modified with heavy chains attached to the walls, and those chains were connected to the truck itself, wrapped around the frame and axles as if someone was trying to keep it from moving. 4 men were working to disconnect the chains, and they all looked nervous, working quickly and avoiding eye contact with the truck. Vincent walked over to the auction house owner, a thin man in his 60s named Douglas who was sweating despite the mild evening temperature. Vincent gestured at the chained truck. "You want to tell me what's going on here? Why is that thing chained up like it's going to drive away on its own?" Douglas wiped his forehead with a handkerchief and spoke quietly. "Listen, I'm going to be straight with you because you seem like a reasonable man. That truck has a history, a bad history. It was involved in a fatal accident in 1989. Driver and 2 passengers died. Since then, that truck has been bought and sold 17 times, and every single owner has reported the same thing. The truck moves on its own, starts itself up, drives at night with no one behind the wheel. 3 of those owners died in accidents while the truck was in their possession. The rest got rid of it as fast as they could." Vincent stared at Douglas, waiting for the punchline, but the old man's expression was dead serious. "You're telling me this truck is haunted? And you want me to transport it at night?" Douglas nodded. "The collector who's buying it, he specializes in this sort of thing. Paranormal vehicles, cursed objects, that kind of business. He's been trying to acquire this truck for years. But here's the thing, and this is why the pay is so high. The truck is most active at night, and it's most dangerous when it's stationary. When it's moving, when it's being transported, it seems to be dormant. The collector's theory is that the truck wants to keep moving, wants to be on the road, and as long as you keep driving, you'll be fine. But if you stop for more than a few minutes, if you give it a chance to wake up, that's when things get bad." Vincent should have walked away. Every instinct told him this was insane, that haunted trucks weren't real, that this was some kind of elaborate prank or scam. But triple rate was triple rate, and Vincent prided himself on never backing down from a job. He helped the workers load the truck onto his transport trailer, securing it with heavy straps and chains. The whole time, Vincent felt like the truck was watching him, even though it was just a piece of metal and glass with no one inside. The workers finished loading it just after 9 p.m., and Douglas handed Vincent an envelope with half the payment in cash and detailed directions to the collector's property in Tennessee. "Drive straight through," Douglas repeated. "Don't stop except for fuel, and even then make it fast. And whatever you do, don't look in the truck's mirrors. I don't know why, but everyone who's looked in those mirrors has seen something they wish they hadn't." Vincent pulled out of the auction house lot at 9:15 p.m. with the '67 Chevrolet secured on his trailer. He merged onto Interstate 55 heading north, and for the first hour everything was normal. His truck ran smoothly, traffic was light, and the cargo sat motionless on his trailer. Vincent started to relax, started to think that Douglas had been exaggerating, that this was just a damaged old truck with an unfortunate history and nothing more. Then at 10:30 p.m., Vincent heard a sound that made his blood run cold. An engine starting. Not his engine, which was running smoothly beneath him, but another engine behind him. The distinctive sound of an old Chevrolet V8 roaring to life. Vincent checked his side mirror and felt his stomach drop. The truck on his trailer, the supposedly dormant and secured vehicle, had its headlights on. Both headlights were blazing, illuminating the highway behind Vincent's transport rig. That should have been impossible. The truck's battery had been disconnected by the auction house workers specifically to prevent any electrical activity. Vincent had watched them do it, but the lights were on, undeniably real, casting long shadows across the road. Vincent keyed his CB radio, about to call for help, when he remembered he was alone on this job with no support team and no one expecting to hear from him until he reached Tennessee. He kept driving, telling himself the lights meant nothing, that maybe there was a backup battery he didn't know about, that there was a rational explanation. Then the truck's horn blasted, 3 long bursts that echoed across the empty highway. Vincent nearly swerved off the road in shock. The horn sounded again and again, as if someone in the cab was pressing it repeatedly, demanding attention. Vincent's hands were shaking on the wheel. He thought about pulling over, about stopping to check the cargo, but he remembered Douglas's warning. Don't stop. Keep moving. As long as you're moving, it stays dormant. But the truck wasn't dormant. It was active, its engine running even though it was secured to a trailer, its lights blazing, its horn blaring. Vincent drove faster, pushing 75 miles per hour, trying to outrun the impossible thing he was carrying. The engine, noise behind him grew louder, a deep rumbling that Vincent could feel through his seat, through the whole frame of his rig. Then he felt something that nearly made him lose control completely. His trailer was pulling. The truck on his trailer was trying to drive, its wheels spinning against the chains and straps holding it down, trying to push forward, trying to break free. Vincent could feel the resistance in his steering wheel, could feel his entire rig being pushed and pulled by a vehicle that should have been inert cargo. He checked his mirror again and saw the truck rocking on his trailer, bouncing against its restraints, and in the cab of the truck he saw a silhouette. A dark shape behind the steering wheel, a figure that shouldn't be there because the cab was empty, had been empty when they'd loaded it. The figure had its hands on the wheel, and even though Vincent couldn't see details, he knew with absolute certainty that the figure was looking at him in the mirror, staring at him with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. Vincent remembered Douglas's other warning. Don't look in the truck's mirrors. But Vincent had already looked, and what he'd seen was burned into his mind. The silhouette wasn't right. It was too tall, stretched vertically like someone had pulled it upward, and where its head should be there was just a dark mass that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Vincent tore his eyes away from the mirror and focused on the road ahead. His fuel gauge was approaching empty. He'd need to stop soon, but the thought of stopping with that thing on his trailer made him want to scream. He saw signs for a truck stop 5 miles ahead and made a decision. He'd fuel up as fast as humanly possible, stay in his cab the entire time, use the pump's pay at the pump feature and get back on the road. 2 minutes maximum, he could do this. Vincent took the exit and pulled into the truck stop, a busy place with multiple pumps and lots of other trucks. He pulled up to a diesel pump and kept his engine running. He swiped his credit card and started fueling, watching the numbers climb on the pump display while simultaneously watching his mirrors for any sign of the truck behind him. For a moment, Everything was quiet. The truck's engine had shut off. Its lights were off. It sat motionless on the trailer like normal cargo. Vincent started to breathe easier. Maybe it really did stay dormant while moving, and now that he'd stopped, it had powered down. Maybe he could finish this job after all. The fuel pump clicked off. Tank full, and Vincent replaced the nozzle. He was about to climb back in his cab when he heard screaming. A woman was standing near another truck, pointing at Vincent's trailer, her face pale with terror. Other people turned to look, and Vincent heard gasps and shouts. He slowly turned to see what they were seeing, and his heart nearly stopped. The truck on his trailer was moving. Not rocking or bouncing, but actually moving, driving forward against the chains and straps that held it. The chains were stretching, the straps were tearing, and the truck was rolling forward with its headlights blazing and its engine roaring. The silhouette was visible in the cab again, hands on the wheel, hunched forward as if concentrating on driving. Vincent ran for his cab and climbed inside, but before he could put his rig in gear, he heard the sound of metal snapping. The chains holding the truck had broken. The straps had torn completely. The 1967 Chevrolet was free, and it rolled off the back of Vincent's trailer, landing on its wheels with a crash that echoed across the truck stop. The truck's brake lights flared, its engine revved, and then it drove. It drove across the parking lot with no visible driver, just that stretched silhouette visible for anyone who looked closely, and headed toward the exit. People were screaming and running. Someone was calling 911. Vincent sat in his cab, frozen in shock, watching the truck disappear onto the highway. He should have felt relieved. The cursed thing was gone, no longer his problem. But then Vincent remembered the delivery address, the collector in Tennessee who was expecting this truck. Vincent called the number Douglas had given him, and a calm male voice answered. The collector listened to Vincent's panicked explanation, then said something that made Vincent's blood freeze. "That's unfortunate, but not unexpected. The truck will make its own way here eventually. It always does. It's been destroyed 4 times, burned, crushed, buried, and every time it comes back restored, whole, ready to drive again. You can't kill it because it's already dead. The 3 people who died in it in 1989, they never left. They're still in that truck, still trying to reach a destination they'll never arrive at, driving forever on highways that exist between life and death." The collector thanked Vincent for his attempt and said the payment would still be honored. Vincent ended the call and sat there in the truck stop parking lot for an hour, watching police arrive, watching them take statements from witnesses who described a truck driving itself, watching them search the highway and find nothing. The truck was gone, vanished onto some road that maps didn't show. Vincent drove home empty that night, his trailer scarred and torn from where the truck had broken free, and he never took another transport job involving vehicles with questionable histories. But sometimes, late at night when Vincent was driving alone, he'd see a '67 Chevrolet pickup in his mirrors, old and damaged, with blazing headlights and a silhouette behind the wheel that was too tall and too dark. The truck would follow him for miles, always staying the same distance back, and Vincent would push his speed higher and higher until the truck finally disappeared. Other drivers reported seeing it too. A ghost truck, that truck, appeared on southern highways, following transport rigs and semis as if it was looking for the trailer that had carried it, looking for Vincent, wanting to finish the journey it had started. Vincent learned that some cargo should never be transported, that some vehicles carried more than just metal and memories, and that the highways connected not just places but states of existence. And somewhere out there, on some dark road between Louisiana and Tennessee, a truck that refused to stay buried was still driving, still searching, still carrying passengers who would never arrive at any destination except the endless night road that had claimed them 34 years ago and would never let them rest. Story 7. The Fog That Followed Me Home. Marcus Reeves had been driving regional routes through New England for 8 years, specializing in overnight deliveries between Boston and Portland. He knew every curve of Interstate 95, every rest area, every place where fog tended to roll in from the Atlantic and blanket the highway in thick white clouds. Marcus wasn't afraid of fog. He'd driven through conditions where visibility dropped to 10 feet, where his headlights barely penetrated the dense moisture, where the world disappeared into whiteness. Fog was just part of the job in coastal New England. But in October of 2022, Marcus drove through fog that wasn't normal, fog that had intention and hunger, fog that followed him home and changed his life forever. It was 2 a.m. when Marcus left Portland with a load of seafood heading to distribution centers in Boston. The night was clear when he started, stars visible overhead, temperature cool but comfortable. Marcus settled into his routine, coffee in the cup holder, news radio playing low. His mind already calculating arrival time and planning his route home after the delivery. About 40 minutes south of Portland, near the town of Wells, Marcus noticed fog forming ahead. It appeared suddenly a wall of white that stretched across all lanes of the highway, impossibly thick and perfectly defined, as if someone had drawn a line and said, "Fog starts here." Marcus slowed down as he entered the fog bank, his visibility dropping instantly to almost nothing. His headlights reflected back at him off the dense moisture, creating a disorienting white glare. He dropped his speed to 30 miles per hour, then 20, following the white line on the edge of the road because he couldn't see anything else. The fog was thicker than any he'd experienced before, so dense it felt solid, like driving through wet cotton. Marcus turned on his hazard lights and his fog lamps, but the extra lights only made visibility worse. He couldn't see any other vehicles, couldn't see road signs, couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead of his hood. Then Marcus noticed something wrong. The fog was moving against the wind. He could see it swirling around his truck in patterns that didn't match the direction he was traveling. The fog was flowing toward his truck from all sides, converging on him, wrapping around his rig like it was alive. Marcus told himself he was imagining things, that fog couldn't move with purpose, that it was just an optical illusion caused by his own motion. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was aware of him, that it had noticed his truck and was gathering around it with deliberate intent. His radio started acting strange, the news station cutting in and out, replaced by static, and underneath the static, sounds that might have been voices. Marcus tried changing stations, but every frequency gave him the same thing. Static, and those almost voices speaking in rhythms that sounded like language but made no sense. He turned the radio off and immediately wished he hadn't. The silence inside his cab was oppressive, broken only by the rumble of his engine and a new sound, a tapping on his windows, as if tiny fingers were drumming against the glass from outside. Marcus looked at his passenger window and saw shapes in the fog, dark forms that moved alongside his truck, keeping pace with him. They were vaguely human-shaped but wrong, too tall and too thin, with limbs that bent in ways that defied anatomy. Marcus jerked his eyes back to the road, his heart hammering. He was seeing things. Had to be seeing things, because nothing could run alongside a truck doing 20 miles per hour through fog this thick. But he could still see them in his peripheral vision, those dark shapes flowing through the white fog, matching his speed exactly. The GPS on his dashboard showed him still on Interstate 95, but the estimated arrival time kept changing, jumping forward and backward randomly, the distance to Boston increasing instead of decreasing. Marcus had been driving through this fog bank for 20 minutes, should have been through it by now, but the fog showed no signs of thinning. He thought about pulling over, about stopping until the fog cleared, but something instinctive told him that stopping would be the worst thing he could do. Whatever was in this fog, it wanted him to stop. Marcus pushed his speed back up to 35, then 40, driving faster than was safe in these conditions, but desperate to get out of this impossible fog. The shapes in the fog moved faster, keeping pace, and now there were more of them, dozens of dark figures running alongside his truck, surrounding him. The tapping on his windows grew louder, more insistent, and Marcus realized with horror that the fog itself was pressing against his truck, pushing on the sides of his trailer, creating resistance that he could feel through his steering wheel. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the fog ended. Marcus burst out of the white wall into clear night air, and he immediately pulled over on the shoulder, his whole body shaking. He looked in his mirrors and saw the fog bank behind him, a solid wall of white that looked unnatural, too uniform, too dense. And in that wall of fog, he saw faces. Dozens of faces pressed against the white surface like people trapped behind frosted glass, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands pressed flat as if trying to push through. Marcus stared for 10 seconds, then the fog began moving toward him, flowing down the highway like a living thing, and Marcus got his truck moving again. He drove straight to Boston without stopping, delivered his load, and headed home to his apartment in Portsmouth. The sun was coming up as he pulled into his parking lot, and Marcus had never been so grateful to see daylight. He went inside, took a hot shower to wash away the lingering chill from that fog, and collapsed into bed. He woke up 6 hours later to darkness. Complete darkness. Marcus sat up in confusion. It had been noon when he'd gone to sleep. He'd set his alarm for 6 p.m., but his bedroom was pitch black, no light coming through the windows at all. Marcus stumbled to his window and pulled back the curtain, and his stomach dropped. Fog. Thick white fog pressed against his window, so dense he couldn't see anything beyond it. Not the parking lot, not other buildings, nothing. Just white fog that seemed to pulse slightly, moving in ways fog shouldn't move. Marcus grabbed his phone. The time showed 2 p.m., daylight hours. But outside his window was nothing but fog and darkness. He checked the weather app. Clear skies, it said. No fog reported anywhere in the area. Marcus went to his front door and opened it cautiously. The hallway of his apartment building was normal, lit by fluorescent lights, other apartment doors visible. But at the end of the hallway, where the exit door should lead to the parking lot, there was fog. It had filled the space beyond the exit, and as Marcus watched, it began seeping under the door, flowing into the hallway like smoke, moving toward him with clear intention. Marcus slammed his apartment door and locked it, then watched in horror as fog began seeping under his door too, thin tendrils of white mist creeping across his floor. He called 911, tried to explain that something was wrong, that there was fog inside his building, but the operator couldn't understand what he was reporting. Fog wasn't an emergency. Marcus hung up and backed away from his door as more fog flowed in. The tendrils spread across his floor, climbing his walls, filling his apartment with white mist that carried that same wrong feeling from the highway. In the fog, Marcus saw shapes forming, those same tall, thin figures appearing in his living room, standing motionless, watching him with eyes he couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. Marcus ran to his bedroom, shut the door, and shoved towels against the gap at the bottom. He called his dispatcher, told them he was sick and couldn't drive for a few days, then sat on his bed and waited. The fog filled his bedroom anyway, seeping through cracks he didn't know existed, gathering in corners, thickening by the minute. The shapes appeared again, closer now, close enough that Marcus could see they weren't solid, just denser concentrations of fog in human form. But they moved like they were real, like they were aware. 3 days later, the fog finally receded. Marcus emerged from his apartment pale and exhausted, having barely slept while the fog filled his home. He moved out that week, couldn't stay in that apartment, couldn't risk the fog coming back. But it didn't matter. The fog found him at his new place. It appeared outside his windows at night, pressed against the glass, seeping in through any opening. Marcus tried everything, sealed his windows, kept lights on constantly, burned sage and set up religious symbols. But nothing stopped the fog from visiting. Marcus stopped driving trucks. He couldn't risk encountering that fog bank again on the highway. Couldn't risk drawing more attention from whatever intelligence lived in that white mist. He took a day job at a warehouse, worked only during daylight hours, and learned to live with the fact that several nights a week, fog would fill his home and those shapes would appear, standing in his rooms, watching him, waiting for something Marcus didn't understand. Other drivers reported the fog too. A fog bank on Interstate 95 near Wells that appeared suddenly and never cleared. That trapped drivers in whiteness and showed them faces and figures that shouldn't exist. Some drivers made it through. Others disappeared, their trucks found abandoned on the shoulder, engines still running, drivers never seen again. Story 8. The Delivery That Never Ended. Samuel Torres had been a courier driver for 6 years, running expedited shipments across Texas for a small logistics company based in Houston. Unlike long-haul truckers who drove big rigs, Samuel drove a box truck, handling time-sensitive deliveries that needed to reach their destinations within tight windows. He prided himself on never missing a deadline, never losing a package, and maintaining a spotless driving record. Samuel was efficient, professional, and completely unprepared for what happened on a November night in 2021 when he accepted a delivery that he's still trying to complete to this day. The job came in at 7 p.m., just as Samuel was finishing his last scheduled delivery. His dispatcher called with an urgent request. A medical supply company needed a package delivered to a hospital in El Paso, a drive of about 9 hours from Houston. The package contained time-sensitive materials for a surgery scheduled for early the next morning. Triple overtime pay, his dispatcher said, and a significant bonus if he made it on time. Samuel agreed immediately. He picked up the package from the medical supply company, a medium-sized box marked with biohazard symbols and temperature warnings, secured it in his truck and headed west on Interstate 10. The first 3 hours were completely normal. Samuel made good time. Traffic was light, and his truck ran perfectly. The box sat secured in the back, and Samuel checked on it during a fuel stop to make sure it was maintaining proper temperature according to the monitors attached to it. Everything was exactly as it should be. Around 10:30 p.m., somewhere between San Antonio and Junction, Samuel noticed his GPS acting strange. The route display flickered, the arrival time changed to a series of dashes, and then the screen went completely black. Samuel wasn't worried. He knew this route well enough to navigate without GPS. He'd just follow Interstate 10 west until he reached El Paso. But 20 minutes later, Samuel realized something was wrong. He should have reached the town of Junction by now, should have seen signs for it miles back, but the highway just kept going, empty and dark, with no towns, no exits, no landmarks he recognized. Samuel checked his odometer. He'd driven over 200 miles since leaving Houston, but his surroundings suggested he was still in the same empty stretch of highway. The road looked identical in every direction, the same flat terrain, the same sparse vegetation, the same stars overhead. Samuel tried his phone. No signal. His radio picked up only static on every station. His GPS remained dead. Samuel kept driving, telling himself he'd hit a recognizable landmark eventually, that he was just disoriented and tired. But another hour passed, then another, and the highway never changed. No other vehicles appeared in either direction. No road signs indicated towns or distances. Samuel was alone on an endless stretch of Interstate 10 that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist because he knew this route and there weren't any sections this long and empty. At midnight, Samuel saw lights ahead and felt a rush of relief. A town, finally. Somewhere he could stop and figure out what was happening. But as he got closer, the lights resolved into something that made his stomach sink. A rest area. The exact same rest area he'd stopped at 3 hours ago for fuel. Samuel was certain of it. He recognized the layout, the buildings, even a distinctive crack in the pavement near the entrance. But that was impossible. He'd been driving west the entire time, hadn't turned around, hadn't taken any exits. He couldn't be back at the same rest area. Samuel pulled in anyway, desperate to understand what was happening. The rest area looked identical to how it had looked 3 hours ago, except now it was completely empty. His truck was the only vehicle. Samuel got out and walked to the building, but the doors were locked, the windows dark. He walked around the entire facility, shouting for help, but no one answered. His voice echoed strangely, as if the rest area was much larger than it appeared. Samuel got back in his truck and checked the package in the back. Still secure, temperature holding steady, monitors showing everything normal. He pulled out of the rest area and continued west, determined to reach El Paso no matter what. But 2 hours later, he saw the same rest area again. The exact same place with the same crack in the pavement, the same locked buildings. Samuel screamed in frustration and kept driving, refusing to stop. Over the next 4 hours, he passed the same rest area 7 more times. Each time he saw it, his fuel gauge showed he was getting lower. His truck's trip meter showed he was traveling miles, but he was clearly driving in some kind of loop. At 6 a.m., when the sun should have been rising, the sky remained dark. No hint of dawn, no lightening of the horizon, just continued night, as if the sun had decided not to rise. Samuel's phone showed the correct time, showed that it was morning, but the world outside his truck was still locked in darkness. Samuel pulled over on the shoulder, not at the rest area, but just on the side of the highway, and sat there trying to understand. He'd been driving for 11 hours, should have reached El Paso 2 hours ago, but he was trapped in a loop on a highway that went nowhere. He got out of his truck and walked to the back, opening the door to check the package again. It sat there in its secured container, monitors showing everything stable, but something about it looked different. The box seemed to be glowing faintly, a soft blue light pulsing from inside it. Samuel reached out to touch it, then pulled his hand back. The air around the package felt cold, much colder than it should, and when Samuel looked closely at the label, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The delivery address in El Paso didn't exist. He recognized the street name, but the building number was impossible. The address was listed as a negative number. Samuel pulled out his phone and called his dispatcher, not expecting it to work, but desperate to try. To his shock, the call connected. His dispatcher answered, sounding annoyed. "Where are you?" "The hospital has been calling. That delivery was supposed to arrive 3 hours ago." Samuel tried to explain what was happening, that he'd been driving all night but couldn't reach El Paso, that he was stuck in some kind of loop. His dispatcher interrupted him. "What are you talking about?" "You left Houston 20 minutes ago. I'm looking at your GPS right now. You're still in the Houston area." Samuel looked at his truck's clock. It showed 6:15 a.m., matching his phone, but he'd been driving for 11 hours. He'd watched those hours pass on his dashboard. Samuel told his dispatcher to check the timestamp on when the package was picked up. There was silence. Then his dispatcher came back on, voice confused. "According to our system, you picked up the package at 6:45 p.m. yesterday, just like you said. But our GPS tracking shows you've only been driving for 20 minutes and you're still near Houston. That doesn't make sense." Samuel ended the call and stood there on the shoulder of this impossible highway, trying to reconcile two contradictory realities. Either he'd been driving all night and was trapped in a loop somewhere in West Texas, or he'd only been driving for 20 minutes and was still near Houston but experiencing time differently. Samuel got back in his truck and kept driving, and this time he paid close attention to everything around him. The highway looked real. The road surface had normal wear patterns, the paint on the lines was faded in places, the mile markers looked authentic. But Samuel started noticing small details that were wrong. The mile markers weren't in sequence. He'd pass mile marker 312, then 305, then 321. The numbers were random. The stars overhead were in patterns he didn't recognize, constellations that looked almost familiar but were arranged wrong. And in the distance, far off the highway, Samuel could see lights that might have been towns, but they never got closer no matter how long he drove toward them. They stayed fixed at the same distance, like painted backgrounds in a video game. Samuel realized he wasn't on a real highway. He was on something that looked like Interstate 10 but existed somewhere else, some pocket dimension or alternate reality where distance and time didn't work correctly. And the package in his truck, that glowing box with the impossible address, was somehow the key to it all. Samuel made a decision. He pulled over, went to the back of his truck, and looked at the package again. The label had instructions he hadn't noticed before, small print at the bottom that said, "Do not open until delivered. Failure to deliver will result in loop continuation." Samuel understood then. This was a test or a trap or some kind of supernatural delivery that couldn't be completed because the destination didn't exist. As long as he carried this package, as long as he tried to deliver it, he'd be stuck in this loop forever. Samuel did the only thing he could think of. He opened the package. Inside was nothing. Literally nothing. Empty space that seemed to go deeper than the box's dimensions should allow. A void that pulled at his vision and made his head spin. Samuel closed the box quickly and threw it off the side of the highway into the darkness beyond the shoulder. The moment the box left his hands, the world lurched. Samuel felt a sensation like falling sideways, and suddenly he was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the medical supply company in Houston. His clock showed 6:50 p.m. His phone showed the same time. He'd been sitting there for 5 minutes after picking up the package. Samuel looked in the back of his truck. Empty. No package, no delivery, no record of it ever existing. His dispatcher called. "Never mind about that El Paso delivery, the client canceled. You can head home." Samuel did exactly that. But sometimes, late at night when Samuel is trying to sleep, he feels the sensation of driving on that endless highway, trapped in a loop that maybe he never really escaped. He dreams about that rest area appearing again and again, about mile markers in the wrong sequence, about a package that glowed with impossible light and contained nothing at all. Samuel still drives for the logistics company, still makes deliveries across Texas. But he's learned to check every label carefully, to refuse any job with an address that doesn't quite make sense, because he knows now that some deliveries aren't meant to be completed. They're meant to trap you forever on highways that exist between reality and somewhere else entirely. Story 9. The Way Station That Weighed Souls. Jennifer Cole had been a freight hauler for 14 years, running routes across the Midwest and occasionally into the Deep South. She was experienced, cautious, and meticulous about following regulations. Jennifer never skipped way stations, never exceeded weight limits, and kept all her paperwork perfectly organized. She'd been through hundreds of way stations in her career, those mandatory checkpoints where trucks are inspected and weighed to ensure they're safe and legal. Jennifer thought she'd seen every kind of way station that existed, from modern automated facilities to old rundown buildings staffed by bored inspectors. But in August of 2022, Jennifer pulled into a way station in Mississippi that didn't weigh cargo. It weighed something else entirely. Jennifer was hauling furniture from Arkansas to Florida, a straightforward run down Interstate 55 through Mississippi. It was 2 a.m., and she'd been driving for 6 hours when she saw the sign commanding all trucks to enter the way station ahead. The sign looked official, standard Department of Transportation design, and Jennifer put on her turn signal and took the exit ramp. The way station appeared normal at first glance, a small building with a covered scale area and a parking lot for trucks that needed detailed inspections. But as Jennifer rolled onto the scale, she noticed the lights were wrong. Instead of the usual bright fluorescence, the station was lit with dim yellow bulbs that cast everything in a sickly glow. Jennifer stopped on the scale and waited for the usual process. A weight display would show her truck's total weight. Then a light would signal either green for proceed or red for pull aside for inspection. But instead of a light, a speaker crackled to life with a voice that made Jennifer's skin crawl. The voice was wrong, too deep and too hollow, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Driver, step out of your vehicle and come to the station building for processing." Jennifer hesitated. That wasn't standard procedure. Normally, drivers stayed in their cabs unless specifically called for inspection. But the voice repeated the command, more insistent this time. Jennifer climbed out of her cab and walked toward the station building, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The building's windows were dark except for one office that glowed with that same yellow light. Jennifer pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior looked like a normal way station office with a desk, filing cabinets, and safety posters on the walls. But sitting behind the desk was someone who definitely wasn't a normal inspector. The man was wearing what looked like a dot uniform, but his face was wrong. His features were too symmetrical, too perfect, like a computer-generated image of a human rather than an actual person. His eyes were the worst part, completely black with no visible iris or pupil, just solid darkness that reflected nothing. The man smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too uniform. "Welcome to Station 713, he said in that same hollow voice Jennifer had heard over the speaker. "We need to conduct a special inspection of your vehicle." Jennifer's mouth was dry, but she managed to speak. "What kind of inspection?" The man's smile widened. "A compliance inspection. We need to verify that your cargo matches what you're carrying inside." Jennifer frowned. "Inside? I'm hauling furniture. That's my cargo." The man shook his head slowly. "No, driver. Your cargo is what's in your trailer. We need to verify what you're carrying inside yourself." Jennifer backed toward the door. This was insane. This person was insane. She needed to get out of here, needed to get back to her truck and leave. But when she turned toward the door, it was gone. The wall was solid, no door, no exit, just blank surface with safety posters. Jennifer spun back to the man at the desk. "What's happening? What is this place?" The man stood up, unnaturally tall, his head nearly touching the ceiling. "This is a weigh station," he said calmly. "We weigh what matters. Your truck's weight is irrelevant. We need to weigh your guilt, your regrets, your sins. Everyone who passes through here gets weighed, and if you're too heavy, you don't leave." Jennifer felt tears burning in her eyes. She thought about running, but there was nowhere to run. She thought about fighting, but this thing behind the desk wasn't human, wasn't something she could fight. The man gestured to a chair in front of the desk. "Sit down. This won't take long." Jennifer sat, her legs too weak to support her. The man pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing pages covered in handwriting she recognized as her own. "These are your confessions," he said. "Everything you've done that weighs on your conscience. Let's begin the assessment." He started reading. Jennifer Cole, age 42, 14 years as a commercial driver. You were driving on March 15, 2015 when you hit a dog on a rural highway. You didn't stop. You told yourself the dog was already dead, but you knew it might have been alive. You knew someone loved that dog and you kept driving. Jennifer felt the memory hit her like a physical blow. She'd forgotten about that, had buried it, but yes. She'd hit a dog and hadn't stopped, had convinced herself it was already dead to ease her conscience. The man continued reading, listing incidents Jennifer had forgotten or tried to forget, small cruelties and cowardices that accumulated over a lifetime. By the time he finished, Jennifer was crying, overwhelmed by the weight of her own actions presented back to her in clinical detail. The man closed the folder. Your total weight is significant but not insurmountable. However, there's one more item we need to address. You're currently transporting something that doesn't belong to you, something you took without permission. Jennifer shook her head. I didn't take anything. My cargo is all legitimate, properly manifested. The man's black eyes seemed to bore into her. Not your physical cargo. You're carrying guilt from someone else. You witnessed an accident 3 months ago and didn't report it because you didn't want the delay. A man was injured and you drove past. That guilt isn't yours to carry and it's making you too heavy. Jennifer remembered. She'd seen a car accident on a back road, a single vehicle that had gone into a ditch. She'd slowed down, seen someone moving in the car, but there were already other vehicles stopping and she was running late on a delivery. She told herself help was already there and had kept driving. But she'd felt guilty about it ever since, wondering if she should have stopped, wondering if one more person helping would have made a difference. The man stood and walked around the desk. You need to release that guilt. It's not yours. You didn't cause the accident. Other people were helping. You're carrying unnecessary weight. He placed a hand on Jennifer's shoulder and she felt a sensation like something heavy lifting off her chest. The guilt about the accident, the weight she'd been carrying for 3 months, suddenly evaporated. She could breathe more easily, felt lighter physically. The man returned to his desk. Your total weight is now acceptable. You may proceed. But remember, Station 713 is always here. Every driver passes through eventually, and we always conduct our inspections. Some drivers are too heavy to leave. They stay here, working off their weight, paying what they owe. You're fortunate. You can still leave. The door reappeared in the wall and Jennifer ran for it without looking back. She got into her truck, which was still sitting on the scale, and drove off without waiting for any signal. The way station disappeared in her mirrors, and when Jennifer checked her GPS, there was no way station marked at that location. She called the Mississippi DOT the next day and described the location. They told her there was no way station on that stretch of highway. Hadn't been one for over 20 years since they'd built a new facility 15 miles north. Jennifer finished her delivery to Florida, but she couldn't forget Station 713 and the man with black eyes who had weighed her guilt and regrets like cargo. She started driving differently after that, more carefully, more aware of her impact on the world around her. She stopped for every accident she encountered, called for help even when others were already helping, went out of her way to avoid hurting anything. Jennifer was trying to stay light, trying to make sure that if she ever passed through Station 713 again, her weight would be acceptable. Other drivers told her about similar experiences when she cautiously brought up the subject. Way stations that appeared where they shouldn't exist. Inspectors who asked questions about things that had nothing to do with cargo weight. Places that weighed souls instead of trucks. The stories were always the same. Drivers who passed through were changed, became more careful, more conscious, more aware that someone or something was keeping track of what they carried inside themselves. And drivers who were too heavy, who carried too much guilt and regret, simply disappeared. Their trucks were found abandoned at rest areas or on shoulders, engines still running, logbooks showing they'd entered a way station and never come out. Jennifer now keeps a journal where she writes down her mistakes, her regrets, the things that weigh on her conscience. She addresses them, makes amends where possible, seeks forgiveness, releases what she can't change. She's determined that if Station 713 appears again in her path when those yellow lights illuminate her truck and that hollow voice commands her to stop for inspection, she'll be light enough to leave. Because Jennifer knows now that some way stations don't care about the cargo in your trailer. They care about what you're carrying in your heart, and that weight matters more than any legal limit the Department of Transportation could ever enforce. Story 10. The Hitchhiker Who Appeared in Every Mirror. Leonard Washington had been driving tanker trucks for 19 years, hauling fuel and chemicals across the western states. He was a cautious driver who never took risks, never picked up hitchhikers, and never drove when he was too tired. Leonard had 3 rules that kept him safe. Always check your mirrors, never trust empty roads, and if something feels wrong, it probably is. Those rules served him well until a cold January night in 2023 when he saw a hitchhiker in his mirror who shouldn't have been there, a hitchhiker who appeared in every reflection, following him through mirrors and glass, getting closer with each glance. Leonard was hauling gasoline from refineries in Wyoming to stations in Nevada, a long overnight run through empty desert highways. It was 11 p.m. when he left Cheyenne, the temperature well below freezing, snow falling lightly. The roads were clear enough for safe driving, and Leonard settled into his routine. He checked his mirrors constantly, a habit drilled into him from years of training. Left mirror, rear view, right mirror. Repeat every few seconds. Professional drivers lived by their mirrors, and Leonard was no exception. For the first 2 hours, everything was normal. His mirrors showed empty highway behind him, his own trailer, and occasionally another vehicle passing in the distance. Around 1 a.m. somewhere in Utah on Highway 80, Leonard checked his left mirror and saw something that made his breath catch. A person standing on the shoulder of the highway, arm extended with thumb out, a hitchhiker. Leonard's foot eased off the accelerator instinctively, but he reminded himself of his rule: never pick up hitchhikers. He'd heard too many horror stories, knew too many drivers who'd made that mistake. Leonard kept driving, and as he passed the hitchhiker, he glanced in his rearview mirror to see the figure receding behind him. But the figure wasn't receding. It was standing in the middle of the highway now, facing his truck, arms still extended. Leonard frowned and checked his side mirror. The hitchhiker was there too, standing on the shoulder right beside his trailer, keeping pace with his truck even though Leonard was doing 65 miles per hour. That was impossible. Leonard looked back at his rearview mirror. The hitchhiker was still there, closer now, standing directly behind his truck. Leonard's heart rate increased. He checked his right mirror. The hitchhiker was there as well, on the passenger side now. Leonard was seeing the same person in all 3 mirrors simultaneously, in positions that were geometrically impossible. The figure was multiplying or teleporting or somehow existing in multiple places at once. Leonard pushed his speed up to 70, then 75. He checked his mirrors again. The hitchhiker was in all of them, still maintaining those impossible positions, and now Leonard could see more details. The figure was wearing old clothes, a heavy coat, and boots that looked decades out of style. The face was visible now too, pale and expressionless, with eyes that seemed to look directly at Leonard no matter which mirror he checked. And the hitchhiker was getting closer. In his left mirror, the figure was now standing on his trailer. In his rear view, it was right behind his cab. In his right mirror, it was pressed against his passenger window. Leonard's hands were shaking on the wheel. He tried looking directly at his passenger window, but there was nothing there. The window was empty, showing only darkness and falling snow outside. But when he looked at his right mirror, the hitchhiker was still there, face pressed against the glass from outside, breath fogging the window, one hand raised as if knocking. Leonard could hear the knocking now. 3 slow, deliberate taps that echoed through his cab even though nothing was touching his window. He checked his other mirrors. The hitchhiker was in all of them, surrounding his truck in every reflection. Leonard grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is the tanker westbound on 80. Anyone out there seeing anything strange?" Static answered him, harsh and loud. He tried again. "Any drivers on Highway 80, please respond. This is an emergency." The static cleared for a moment, and Leonard heard a voice, but it wasn't another driver. It was the hitchhiker's voice coming through his CB radio, soft and patient. "You should have stopped, Leonard. Everyone should stop. I've been waiting on this highway for so long and everyone just drives past. But I'm patient. I can wait in your mirrors until you're ready to let me in." Leonard threw the CB handset down and focused on driving. He was approaching a town, lights visible ahead, the promise of other people and safety. But as he entered the town limits, he checked his mirrors and saw that the hitchhiker was still there, still in every reflection. Leonard pulled into a brightly lit truck stop, parking among other trucks, and sat there with his engine running, afraid to turn it off, afraid to get out. He looked at his passenger window directly. Nothing there. He looked at his right mirror. The hitchhiker was pressed against the glass, face twisted in something that might have been anger or hunger, mouth open, showing too many teeth. Leonard looked away quickly and noticed something worse. The hitchhiker wasn't just in his truck's mirrors anymore. It was in every reflective surface he could see. The chrome on other trucks showed the figure standing between vehicles. The windows of the truck stop building reflected the hitchhiker pressed against the glass from inside. Even the small rearview mirror hanging from another truck's cab showed the figure, always watching, always waiting. Leonard was seeing this thing in every mirror, every window, every piece of glass or polished metal. The hitchhiker had moved beyond his truck and was now existing in every reflection around him. Leonard made a desperate decision. He got out of his truck and ran toward the truck stop building, not looking at any reflective surfaces, keeping his eyes on the ground. He burst through the door and found himself in a normal convenience store with a few other truckers buying coffee and snacks. Leonard approached the counter and the clerk asked if he was okay. Leonard started to answer, then made the mistake of looking at the security mirror mounted in the corner of the store. The hitchhiker was in it, standing directly behind Leonard, close enough to touch. Leonard spun around. Nothing there, just empty space and other customers who were now staring at him. The clerk asked again if he needed help. Leonard looked at the clerk's name tag to avoid looking at any reflective surfaces. He asked if anyone else had reported seeing strange things in mirrors, seeing hitchhikers that weren't really there. The clerk's expression changed, became more serious. The clerk leaned close and spoke quietly. "You saw the mirror walker. That's what we call it. It's been appearing to drivers on this stretch of highway for years. Once it gets into your mirrors, it doesn't leave. It'll be in every reflection you see for the rest of your life unless you do what it wants." Leonard's voice was barely a whisper. "What does it want?" The clerk shook their head. "No one knows. Some drivers say it wants a ride, wants to be picked up and taken somewhere. Others say it wants to replace you, wants to step out of the mirror and take your place while you get trapped in the reflection. A few drivers have given in, have pulled over on empty highways and opened their doors, and those drivers were never seen again. Their trucks were found empty, engines running, but the drivers vanished. Some people say if you look closely at certain mirrors on that highway, you can see those drivers trapped inside, trying to get out." Leonard left the truck stop without his coffee, got back in his truck and continued driving with his eyes locked on the road ahead. He didn't check his mirrors. He relied on his backup camera and his sense of the traffic around him, but he refused to look at any reflective surface. He made it to Nevada, delivered his load, and immediately requested a route change. No more overnight runs through Utah, no more empty highways where hitchhikers appeared. But it didn't matter. The mirror walker had found him, and it stayed with him. Even now, 2 years later, Leonard sees it every day. Every mirror in his house shows the hitchhiker standing somewhere in the reflection, waiting. Every window reflects the figure pressed against the glass. Every piece of polished metal, every phone screen, every puddle of water shows the same pale face and extended thumb, asking for a ride that Leonard will never give. He's learned to live with it, learned to avoid looking at reflections unless absolutely necessary. Learn to function in a world where every mirror contains a passenger who's been trying to hitch a ride for decades and will wait forever in the glass until someone finally stops and lets them in. Other drivers have reported the mirror walker, always on the same stretch of Highway 80 in Utah, always appearing first in the rearview mirror, then spreading to every reflective surface. Some drivers report that it eventually fades after months or years, disappearing from their mirrors as mysteriously as it arrived. Others say it never leaves, that once you've seen it, you're marked, and it'll be waiting in your reflection until the day you die. Leonard hopes it will fade. He hopes that one morning he'll look in his bathroom mirror and see only his own reflection. No pale figure standing behind him. No extended thumb. No patient expression that says it can wait forever. But until that day comes, Leonard drives carefully, avoids mirrors when he can, and never ever picks up hitchhikers because he knows now that some hitchhikers don't wait on highways. They wait in mirrors, existing in reflections, following drivers through glass and chrome and polished metal, patient and eternal, and always waiting for someone to finally stop and let them out.